All right. That was a familiar tune, ladies and gentlemen. Those many days, every time there was that national holiday or some other presidential event, there would be that marching of some sort, inspecting guard of honor. Are those things still there, by the way? It's a long time since I saw anyone inspecting anything. But hey, that was the Nyayo era. Linus, this was a very unlikely era from the very start. I mean, many people saw this man as a passing cloud, as it was said in the run-up to him taking over, 76, 77. That was a period where there was a very thick plot to make sure that Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, the vice president at the time, didn't become president.
Yes, Moi was a masterclass in political survival. He started off as a most unlikely person in almost every space he appeared, except, of course, when he was a teacher in his early days. Because in 1955 he went into the National Liberation circuits, and he went into the Legislative Council, having replaced Oletameno, whose circumstances of not taking up that position are not very clear. There are a lot of gray areas on how that
late and all those things.
They say he was late. Others say he resigned because the Maasai issues were not being taken seriously. But anyway, Moi was there to take up that position. But more consequentially is the events of the 60s, and specifically 1966, when Joseph Ole Morumbi resigned as the vice president of Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, and Moi was tapped to take over that position. He stayed there for another, I think, 11 years or so as vice president, and taking over against very, very difficult circumstances and predictions of his opponents that he was not going to be. And even as he took off his...
And people of great political pedigree, people who had gone to school, people who had clout.
That's why I describe him as the most unlikely success of the first president. I mean, if you look back in the 60s, there were even bigger giants than him. Tom Mboya was alive, and Odinga was still very, very strong and roaming about politically. So Daniel arap Moi, the quiet man from Tugen Hills, was not the most noticeable person in the room. But there he was, became president, 24 years, 4 months, 8 days. That is political survival.
Yep. You see, what Moi didn't have in terms of academic credentials, he made up for it with subtle wit and ability to disarm his opponents. And he cleverly did it. When you create that impression of a person who is not very forceful, not passionately interested, you disarm those who are interested, and even disarm your would-be opponents. And that's how he quietly navigated and warmed his way into the hearts of some people. And were it not for some of the guys who are very influential at that time, he probably would not have made it. But I would say he totally disarmed those who were extremely ambitious at that time.
But remember, this is someone who totally understood the Kenyan political psyche in ways that many professors and people who had studied books did not understand. I mean, this is someone who thrived even during his presidency on roadside declarations and very basic political statements. Look at even the kind of allies that he had in different corners of this world. They appeared as people who did not understand much, but they were street smart. They knew the people that they were talking to. If you went to Kambani, you look at people like Mulu Mutisia, you would dismiss them and say, but this guy sounds like he is illiterate. But what? Guess what? Those people represented the bulk of the people in the countryside that actually would take Moi very far in his political career, even when now there was active opposition after 1992. But Yvonne, what reflections do you have?
I think for me it was how he personalized power and completely centered it around himself. And he did this obviously by centralizing everything around the party. over which he had total control, everything that was happening in Parliament. I think there's one statement for me that got me where I think it was in 1986, I think, I'm trying to check in my notes, where he said the party is supreme over Parliament and over the judiciary. And that was, you know, his way of doing that. Obviously, all of these things happening after 1982. I think the other thing that stood out for me was the manner in which he used the police and the intelligence service, you know, very high-handedly. And he learned this because, remember, he was Minister for Home Affairs as well as Vice President, and all of these fell under him at that time. And he learned very quickly how to use the police, intelligence, to just get, you know, total control, to quash dissenters when it came to gathering information. Those are some of the things that stood out for me, but it's just all of this centering around himself, and that everything that was criticism of government, criticism of that, became a personal affront against him, the person. That was how he took it. And in that way, anyone who was a dissenter was seen to be disloyal and was seen to be against him. And he would then proceed to use the state machinery to completely quash that.
And for me, Joe, I would remember how the provincial administration thrived under Mois' leadership. Like the PC, the DC, the DO, the chief, the assistant chief were really a big deal in those days. They were his eyes and ears on the ground. You hear of PCs talking about a special phone that would ring, and you know hii ni simu imetoka kwa mzee, and he had his pulse at the heart of each and everything that was happening in the country. I remember growing up, the chief was very, very powerful in terms of even when you need to go get your ID, unaenda kwa chief, nawambia chief, naomba nijaziwe, and like, oh, we ni mtoto wa fulani. You know, they had this power, and that came from the fact that the president did give them those powers. And even if you talk to people who had grown up during the time of the president and about the party, Yvonne, KANU was big in the ground. Like, I don't think there was even a small village or location or sub-location where there wasn't a KANU office. You'd see the symbol of the red and the green and the jogo there and the white.
To date, there are still relics of it. I mean, even where KANU doesn't exist, there will be some building in some corner, somewhere where you see the red and black and the jogos.
Like we interviewed someone today in Turkana.
Yes, I was
about
talking
the
about it.
There.
The paint had faded, but there were these people who, for them, their time with Moi was one they would not forget, because even there are those people who wameshazeeka, but they still have the memorabilia, they still have the pins, they still have the stamps, they still have the flag, they still have the KANU uniform
and the tie,
and
but
they were loyalists
who say
to the party.
that was his greatest asset in terms of political survival, because he survived by basically being in charge. He knew what was happening everywhere, almost at every moment. He had that retinue of special branch, hordes of them in every corner of the country. The provincial administration, as you say, the eyes and the ears, I mean, they knew everything. So he would wake up and call all of these people. And so by the time you are meeting him at some point, even if it's at 8 o'clock, whatever, he knows exactly.
Can I just add something to what you were saying about the provincial administration? So PCs, DCs, DOs were directed by the office of the president to get involved in the internal affairs of KANU. So powerful were they at the time that they had the power to prevent an elected MP from addressing his or her own constituents. That's how powerful it was.
But remember,
so you know, the lines of civil service and party politics.
Right. There's something else we must really remember about Moi's political instincts. He survived by knowing. He had this obsession with information. And the information doesn't have to be accurate. It can be gossip. It can be anything. But he needs to know. And he ran a network that collected information from all over the country. When I was filming Moi and Muigai, the documentary, Fred Gumo told me Moi would know who is having a wedding, who is having marital problems, which cabinet minister is out drinking, the brand of what they are drinking. And he would know everything because he had this obsession with collecting information. And that gave him power. They say information is power. And Moi had a lot of information. He even knew the balances of your accounts, bank accounts. And that he also weaponized that whenever he can, to either coerce or persuade or force somebody to act a certain way politically. He also ran a network of point men ethnic point men around the country. In Ukambani, you had Mulu Mutisi. There was Kariuki Chotara in Nakuru. There used to be Davidson Giboini Kuguru in Nyeri. And look at those men. They're not the most educated people.
No.
They are
not on any airlift to either the US or
they never
Russia
flew anywhere. Yes, but they had local knowledge. They had local information, traditional information, and they were very, very good. And they were able to rally local support for Moi. Those were the networks of information that really kept him going.
For Moi, it was not about sophistication. His main weapon was simplicity. He knew what was happening at every single region. On Tuesday, I interviewed two people at the Lee Funeral Home, and what they told me was very important in my mind. One was Moses Wetangula, and he said Moi's strongest weapon was his unpredictability. You didn't know what he would do. Even the people who were very close to him didn't know his next move, and probably that was one of his strongest weapons. Then Noah Katanangala, and he was telling me that ungedhani una enjoy Moi, kumbe anakuenjoy. Like, he would call you, ask you questions. He already knows the answers, but he wants you to tell him something to confirm whether what you're telling him is what he knows or different. I mean, we've had stories even from Linjiro and the rest that he would call you, like he did to Professor Mbidi, organize a cabinet reshuffle, and then you leave knowing that you have set up so-and-so to be kicked out of the cabinet. And then 1 o'clock news, and actually wewe
first on the list.
First on the list to exit. So that unpredictability. And then lastly, you all remember, even in the villages, people feared talking about Moi. It's like walls had ears. You know, even the very thought of talking about Moi was enough to scare very many people. And that to him was very serious. And I think that's how and why for many days, for many years, very few people will come close to what and where Moi was in terms of local knowledge.
All right, so let's take a short break. News Gang will be right back, and remember, we still have the kicker, the take, the punchline, the memo, and of course the angle on the other side of the break.